Nestled in the secluded resort area known as Blisswood in the quiet town of Goodhart, the brutal slayings of a seemingly ordinary family in June 1968 shocked the community and left behind a haunting legacy that still echoes through the years. Join us as we go into the darkness and shine a light on one of the most unsettling chapters in Michigan's history. This is the story of the Robison family murders. Hello friends, my name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders. Richard Carl Robison, age 42, was born in Wayne County, Michigan. He met his wife Shirley Fulton, age 40, while both attended college. The couple wed in 1947 and had 4 children. Richard Jr., age 19, attended Eastern Michigan University and had an interest in local radio. Gary, age 17, was a student at Southfield Lathrop High School. Randall, age 12, was a middle school student, and brown-haired, blue-eyed Susan, age 7, was a first-grade student and her father's favorite. In the mid-1950s, Richard Sr. established a small advertising agency named R.C. Robinson and Associates, located at 28081 Southfield Road, a few blocks from the family home. The firm managed ad campaigns for businesses within the Detroit region. He was a commercial artist and also owned a small publishing firm called Village House Publishing, which published Impresario, a magazine which focused on the arts, theater, and music. The family lived at 18790 Dolores Avenue in the affluent Detroit suburb of Lathrop Village. They were considered moderately wealthy, owning a private Learjet and a summer cottage in Blisswood. The family regularly attended church services at Southfield Calvary Lutheran Church, and neither parent drank, smoked, or gambled. On Sunday, June 16, 1968, the family began their annual vacation to Blisswood, planning to spend 3 weeks at their seasonal log and stone cottage they had named Somerset. The 2-story, 6-room cottage, purchased in 1956, was secluded, situated at the end of a long private driveway in a heavily wooded area near a 100-foot bluff along the Lake Michigan shoreline. To ensure privacy, Richard Sr. had purchased several adjacent properties to prevent close neighbors. The family traveled to the cottage in 2 cars, accompanied by several traveling companions who stayed in their own rented summer homes. These included friends of the Robison boys, business acquaintances, and personal friends of Richard Sr. and Shirley. On June 23rd, 1 week after arriving, 18-year-old Norman Bliss, the resort caretaker's son and a close friend of Richard Jr., was killed in a motorcycle accident. The next day, Richard Sr. personally offered condolences to Bliss's parents at their Blisswood home and later to Norman's grandparents, explaining that his family could not attend the funeral as they were due to fly from the nearby Pellston Regional Airport to Kentucky, then on to Florida, and would not be back for a couple of weeks. He did, however, offer to pay for the teenager's grave marker and flowers. On June 25th, Richard Sr. called Frank Joydy, his personal banker at the National Bank of Detroit, to check on an expected $200,000 deposit, only to learn it had not been made and his business checking account balance was just $15,000. He then called his receptionist to speak to senior employee Joseph Scolaro III, the only employee with direct access to company accounts, presumably to ask about the missing deposit. This was the last time any family member was known to be alive. Because Richard Sr. had mentioned impending travel plans to Norman's grandparents, neither the Robisons' travel companions nor the resort caretakers were suspicious when the family was not seen for several weeks. Despite the family's Ford LTD station wagon and their rented Chrysler Newport remaining parked at the cottage, it was assumed they had taken a taxi to the airport. On July 22nd, nearly 1 month since the family was last seen, Mrs. Richard Moore, a neighbor of the Robisons, contacted the caretaker of the resort, Chauncey Bliss, complaining of an overpowering odor emanating from the Robison cottage that she had noted while playing a card game with friends on the grounds of her own property, some 150 feet from the Robison cottage. Bliss, along with his employee, Steve Shanaket, investigated, only to find both doors to the cottage locked. Bliss pried open the bolted front door, discovering a gruesome scene, and immediately notified authorities. Emmett County Undersheriff Clifford Fossmore led the investigation into a horrific crime scene. The time lapse between the homicides and their discovery, compiled with the perpetrator turning the heating unit on, resulted in the bodies being in an advanced state of decomposition. The stench was so unbearable that investigators had to wear gas masks to enter the cottage. Richard Sr. lay in the hallway beneath his youngest son, Randall. Susan lay alongside her father and brother, while Shirley's body was in the living room, covered with a red and black plaid blanket. Richard Jr. was found between the hallway and the northwest bedroom, and Gary lay parallel to the east wall of the northwest bedroom. At least 3 of the bodies had been dragged to their final positions. The bodies were transported to the Traverse Hospital, where hospital authorities refused to accept them due to the stench. They were then transported to the 4-H fairgrounds, where the autopsies were performed in a chicken coop. Richard Sr. had been shot in the chest with a .22 caliber firearm and once in the head with a .25 caliber pistol. He had also received a skull fracture. Randall had been shot once in the head by a firearm of unknown caliber. Susan had received a single .25 caliber gunshot to the face in addition to a skull fracture. Shirley had received a single .25 caliber gunshot wound to the head, and Richard Jr. had received several gunshots to the head from a .25 caliber pistol. Gary had been shot once in the back with a .22 caliber firearm and twice in the head with a .25 caliber firearm. There were no signs of a struggle. The curtains were closed and the doors were locked. Despite the decomposition destroying potential physical evidence, a few clues were found. A note on a paper towel attached to the cottage door read, "We'll be back by July 7th or 8th. A hammer suspected to have been used to bludgeon Susie lost any possible fingerprints when Under-Sheriff Fossmore wrapped a handkerchief around the handle to hold it up for reporters. A single bloody footprint led investigators to conclude that one person committed the murders, closing all the curtains and crudely covering the bullet holes in the window with cardboard. 15 spent shell casings, 11 .22 caliber and 4 .25 caliber were found at the scene. Ballistics testing later determined the .25 caliber firearm used was an automatic Beretta pistol, and the .22 caliber bullets were fired from a rare AR-7 Armalite semi-automatic rifle. Investigators spoke with Mr. and Mrs. William R. Freeman, who stated that sometime around dusk on June 25th, they heard 2 men and a woman shouting, followed by gunfire, all coming from the direction of the Robinsons' cottage, which was located about a quarter-mile down the beach. They assumed someone was shooting seagulls on the beach and chose not to investigate. 2 tree trimmers recalled seeing the note and the broken window around 4:30 p.m. on June 26. Caretaker Bliss's father had noticed the bullet holes and a foul odor earlier in the month, but his son ignored his suggestion to investigate further. All of this would lead investigators to conclude the family was likely murdered in the early evening of June 25, 1968. The assailant began outside the property, firing 5 .22 caliber rifle shots through a rear window, hitting Richard Sr. in the chest. A stray shot apparently hit Gary in the back as he played cards with Richard Jr., prompting them to run for a closet where they kept a .22 caliber rifle. The perpetrator then entered through an unlocked door, killing the remaining family members with shots to the head and body from a rifle and a .25 caliber pistol. Randy was dragged into the hallway, placed with his sister and father. Shirley, nude from the waist down, was posed to suggest a sexual motive, although none was found. Emmett County deputies and state police searched the surrounding woods, fields, and roadways for the murder weapons. They were never found. Despite a $9,000 ring, cultured pearls, an emerald brooch, and Richard's .25 caliber gun missing, robbery was ruled out. Expensive camera equipment was in plain sight, and Richard's wallet was still in his pocket, although it had no cash in it. Shirley's purse contained $31, and the older boys had money in their wallets. All known acquaintances were questioned and eliminated as suspects. The potential links to organized crimes were discounted. Investigators theorized the murders were premeditated and likely committed by someone known to the family, possibly as a thrill kill due to the isolated location. Though Richard Sr. was known to be honest, his ad agency had sketchy dealings, potentially making enemies, although it is unknown whether Richard himself was involved in or even knew about these dealings. The agency had swindled between $30,000 and $50,000 from its largest client, Delta Faucet. Approximately $60,000 was unaccounted for from the agency checking account during the 4 months preceding the murders, and unauthorized airline ads inflated the magazine's appearance. There was also the promotion of a mysterious $100 million scheme that was to include everything from computerized warehouses to cultural centers. Richard Sr. had also made 2 unexplained trips to San Francisco and a hotel near Detroit's Metro Airport. Another odd note was that even though he was Lutheran, Richard Sr. wore a St. Christopher medallion inscribed, "To Richard, my chosen son and heir. God bless you, Robert." And a typewritten chart was found depicting the superior table, with Robert listed as the chairman and listing 6 additional men whose identities remained unknown. The chart suggested a worldwide organization aiming for global peace and unity, though even Richard's closest friends were unaware of its existence or meaning. By the second week of the investigation, the Michigan State Police and Emmett County authorities zeroed in on Joseph Raymond Scolaro III, a senior employee of Richard Sr. Scolaro, a Harvard graduate and U.S. Army Security Agency veteran, had worked for Robison's advertising and publishing companies since December 1965 and held a senior position. He had been left in temporary charge of both businesses before the family vacation and had visited Somerset Cottage at least once prior to the murders. Scolaro admitted to speaking with Richard Sr. via telephone on the day of the murders, discussing whether outstanding company checks had arrived. Their final call was around 10:30 a.m., and Scolaro expressed disbelief when confronted about missing company funds, insisting that only Richard Sr. and the company accountant handled the finances, with Richard Sr. being the only one with access to the checkbook. Scolaro told police he left the office before noon at Richard Sr.'s request to attend a plumbing convention at Cobo Hall to maintain relations with their chief client, Delta Faucet. He then went to the Pontchartrain Hotel, where he had 2 drinks at the Salamander Bar and did some window shopping. It had begun to rain heavily, so he checked the Robison home basement for flooding before arriving back at his own home between 10 and 11 p.m. Investigators discovered Scolaro owned 2 .22 caliber semi-automatic rifles and had purchased 2 .25 caliber pistols, the same model and caliber used in the murders. When confronted, Scolaro claimed to have given one pistol to Richard Sr., which was never found, and both rifles to other individuals months before the murders. One rifle was traced to an acquaintance in Chicago, but ballistics testing revealed it was not the murder weapon. The other rifle, allegedly given to a relative, could not be located. In November 1969, shell casings from the AR-7 firearm used in the murders were found at a private Union Lake firing range owned by Scolaro's father-in-law and were considered by police to be conclusive evidence of Scolaro's guilt. Scolaro's .25 caliber Beretta pistol, given to police for forensic testing 2 days after the crime scene discovery, matched the model used in the homicides, although it was deemed not to be the actual murder weapon. Several rare Finnish Psycho .25 caliber cartridges were recovered from the crime scene. Investigators determined Scolaro was one of the few individuals to have purchased this ammunition in Michigan between January and February 1968, the same day he bought the .25 caliber pistols. Scolaro's claims that he had given away both the weapons and ammunition used in the murders before the event were seen as attempts to deflect suspicion. By late 1969, investigators believed they had enough evidence to secure a warrant for his arrest. Investigators presented their 700-page case report to the local prosecutor on December 17, 1969. The detailed report implicated Joseph Scolaro as the sole perpetrator, citing ample circumstantial evidence and concluding that he had the means, motive, and opportunity to commit the crime. However, the following month, Emmett County Prosecutor Donald C. Nogle and Attorney General Frank Kelly ruled that insufficient evidence existed to bring formal charges against Scolaro. They noted that although the spent shell casings from Scolaro's private firing range matched those used in the murders, the 2 firearms used had not been recovered. Additionally, no other physical evidence placed Scolaro at the crime scene. As a result, he was never charged with the murders, despite investigators' continued belief in his guilt. Within 4 months of the Robison family murders, Scolaro assumed directorship of R.C. Robinson and Associates, an impresarial magazine. Having purchased the firms from the Robisons' estate, Scolaro managed both companies from Richard Sr.'s former office. An estate analysis revealed that both the ad agency and the publishing house were in poor financial health at the time of the murders, surprising many who knew Richard Sr. The Robison family were laid to rest in Oakland County, Michigan, on July 26, 1968. Their internments in Acadia Park Cemetery followed a service attended by several hundred mourners, with the caskets of Richard Sr. and Shirley flanked by those of their 4 children. Upon orders of the National Bank of Detroit, the executors of the Robison estate Somerset Cottage was demolished in the spring of 1969 due to an executive ruling that the building was no longer livable due to the stench and blood not being able to be cleaned away. The Moore family, remember it was Mrs. Moore who reported the foul odor, put their cabin up for sale and never returned to Blisswood after the murders. In 1972, 4 years after the murders, newly elected Oakland County Chief Prosecutor Lewis Brooks Patterson decided to charge Joseph Scolaro with the murders. However, on March 8, 1973, Scolaro committed suicide by shooting himself in the head in his Southfield office. His body was discovered slumped in his high-back chair at about 3:30 p.m. 2 typewritten suicide notes were found at the scene. One note, attached to the office door, warned his mother not to enter. The other, also addressed to his mother, acknowledged his acts of fraud and forgery, but ended with a handwritten denial of responsibility for the Robison murders. The note stated, "Mother, where do I start? I am a liar, cheat, phony. Any check that any of the people have with your signature isn't any good because I forged your name to it to get them off my back. I owe everybody you can think of. I have made poor investments and in some cases no investment at all. I love you dearly. But living only causes you more heartache. I just can't help myself. Please understand. Love, Joe." At the end of the letter, he wrote, "P.S. I had nothing to do with the Robisons. I'm a cheat, but not a murderer. Joe." The gun he used to kill himself was not the same one used to kill the Robison family. The investigation into the Robinson family murders became largely inactive following Scolaro's suicide. However, since Michigan law does not allow an open murder case to be closed, the case officially remains open. Despite this, investigators, journalists, and authors remain convinced of Scolaro's guilt. Scolaro remains the prime suspect in the murders, with past and present investigators convinced that, had he not committed suicide, he would have been tried and convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder. I'm not so sure. While I have not found any reports questioning the integrity of the investigation, there are a couple of points nagging at me. On September 4, 1968, workers at the cabin located 14 .22 caliber shell casings in the closet of Susie's bedroom. Where did these come from, and why were they on the closet floor? Wouldn't police have searched the entire cabin during their investigation? On November 1, 1968, Richard Sr., Shirley, and Gary were exhumed in order to check for bullets, and 2 were found. Why were these not discovered during the initial autopsy? The bodies were badly decomposed, which could account for it, but this raises the question of whether more evidence was overlooked. On November 2, 1968, a ring thought to be missing was actually found in Shirley's luggage, which was in police custody. The distance from Lathrop Village to Blisswood was 275 miles, roughly a 5 or 6 hour drive one way. The witnesses who heard the shots on which the police placed the time of death said it was around 9 p.m., much too late for Scolaro to be able to make the return trip of 275 miles to be back home by 10 or 11 p.m., and there is no actual evidence that placed him at the scene. I certainly do not know everything the police may know about this case, and the police tools and tactics of 1968 are much different than today. Could Scolaro have been the killer? Certainly. But I think there are some basic questions that need answers before he's convicted in the media. If you have any thoughts, theories, or comments about the Robinson family murders, please share them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.